Hello, Podwalkers, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. In this episode, we talk about what it means to be an elder. It's not just age. There's a sort of honor, there's a sort of wisdom, there's a sort of gravitas that comes with the title of elder. And we explore that in a variety of different ways throughout this episode, and poke a little bit of fun at Hobbes for being old. Before we leap into the episode, I did want to make note of a couple of things. First of all, a huge thank you to all of our Patreon subscribers. We have 5 patrons currently, and I want to thank them by name. Chris Combs, Taya Steer, and sorry if I mispronounced that, Taya, Carl Halperin, Zach Leubner, again, sorry about a mispronunciation there, I'm pronouncing it the German way, Zaki Singalan. So thank you all for joining our Patreon and subscribing and helping us to, again, keep this podcast cost neutral. That's our main goal here. So again, thank you so much to our 5 patrons. I don't want to harp on this, but I just want to say that we really appreciate that for, again, helping us reach that goal of meeting all of our site fees, our hosting fees so far, and we are so grateful to all of you. And even more so, if you don't donate, that's okay. Please just tell somebody about us. You know, if you see us tweet something out, retweet it. If you sit next to someone on the subway, steal their phone and subscribe them to Goblin Lore and then slip it back into their pocket. Because you're doing a public service when you do that. So, without any further ado, let's get to the show.
Hello and welcome back, Podwalkers. Today we're going to be getting to an episode that we've had planned for quite a while, and I would like to say that I've had a little bit of influence on, given my love and appreciation for Nicol Bolas. We're going to do an episode on elderness and what it means to be an elder. So before we get started, I'd like us to all introduce ourselves, and we're going to answer a question about what tribe would you most like to see get that elder designation at this point?
So I'm Alex Newman, found on Twitter at AlexanderNewM, and my serious answer would probably be like shapeshifters. I think could be interesting. I don't know what you would do with that, but I'm interested to find out what wizards would do with like an elder shapeshifter. That's a tribe that I've always enjoyed, even before the changelings. I like the clones and copy effects like that a lot of shapeshifters were earlier in the game. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with that.
So Alex, you said that was your serious answer, and I'm wondering what you have for us on the less serious side.
Well, I mean, so what I did, and there's a more up-to-date list of creature types. There's one maintained on like MTG Wiki and things, but I've always felt a connection to Mistform Ultimus. Like the first changeling before changelings was a legend from the Onslaught block that had all creature types. And so something Wizards did for a while was whenever they'd add new creature types, they would do the Mistform Ultimus watch. I'm like, all right, well now Mistform Ultimus is also these creatures. So I pulled up that list, the most recent one from Theros, and there's, some funky things. I could make a joke about what about gods, except we kind of already have elder gods. I think where my brain is stuck is elder camels, and I don't know what it is about a camel that's stuck in my head. I mean, like there's silly things like oozes. What's an elder ooze? But like that actually sounds like a thing.
That sounds much more real. Yeah,
an elder camel. I don't know. I might have trouble podcasting this episode because I think that thought's going to be in my brain for a while.
I'm even trying to picture a legendary camel, and we're already stuck right there.
Hi, I'm Joe Redeman. You can find me on Twitter at Findhorn. That's Fynd Horn. And I think even though I'm generally lumped into MTG Cat Twitter, which is, I am a cat dad. That's my general brand. They're obviously like legendary cats, and maybe someday there's a realistic chance that there will be an elder cat. That would be cool. But really, my favorite animal on the planet is penguins. And I would love to see A, more penguins in Magic, because there's one. B, an elder penguin. That would be dope. Can you imagine a penguin with like a monocle and like a wizened long beard? I would love to see that.
So I have to ask you a question, Joe. So how do you feel about the game of Magic having equal numbers of brushwags and penguins?
I'm shocked there isn't an elder brushwag either, to be honest. This is a travesty of R&D that needs to be rectified immediately.
This has been one of our best intros in a while, so I'm going to just keep it going by fully admitting, by the way, I'm Hobbes Q. I can be found on Twitter at Hobbes Q. That I am going to stay completely on brand, and I want an Elder Goblin.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'll already tell you, the Elder Goblin is Squee. Like, it's that simple.
Oh, it has to be.
Magic just doesn't know what they're doing sometimes.
Why isn't he an Elder Goblin?
Why isn't he a planeswalker?
He's been alive for thousands of years. The least you could give the guy is elder.
Right.
What about
right?
old? Well, it could just be old. Like, elder, I know, has some sort of, like, weight and honorific to it. You could just at least give him, like, old goblin, and that's at least pretty cool.
I mean, this ties us in very nicely to start talking about, well, what does elder mean, actually? Because, as you just said, Joe, elder does not necessarily mean old when it comes to Magic. So that's what we're going to be touching on today. And I would say that Squee deserves an honorific that would be more than just being the fact that he's been around for a long time. Because he's seen some stuff. It's beyond just being old. He's seen stuff. And that's mainly because he can die at the drop of a hat. But we really came at this episode thanks to an article that was written last year by somebody that we really respect, Jay and Ellie, who wrote this article on Cool Stuff that we're going to link in the show notes about being elders of the multiverse. So the concept of elder dragons came from early days of Magic. So it cropped up during the set Legends. We had this whole cycle of dragons, the most important of whom is Nicol Bolas, who was not just a dragon type. The type line had this idea of elder dragon. And for many years, we didn't really know what that meant because it wasn't used anywhere else. It had been used in Legends, and then kind of it disappeared from kind of record, or it really wasn't used in stories or really used in kind of on a card until we show up on Tarkir.
And can I say, before we even moved to Tarkir, it was super uncommon back in the early days of Magic. For those of you millennials who've only started playing since the most recent, game update. What was that? That was the Grand Creature update. I can't remember the exact name of this, but where they sort of retconned a lot of creature types on old cards and all that sort of stuff. There weren't a lot of 2-word creature types back in the day. It used to just be legend or human or cat or soldier or whatever. And actually, human, wasn't really around. It was like citizen. It was like your job. Or if you weren't human, it was your race. And so Elder Dragon is pretty uncommon.
Yeah, and there were actually a cycle of dragons that could have gotten that title that they chose not to give it to in Invasion. Like there was a group of the Primevals. Primevals? I don't really know how to pronounce the word. From Dominaria that came in the story and were kind of relevant to the story. And very much, they were just legends.
Yeah.
At the time, like they weren't Elder Dragons. It was just legend.
And of note too, when Joe talks about kind of this, there was kind of this scrubbing of cutting down of creature types. Some creatures gained human. A lot of creatures mainly had creature types taken away that were not really seen as being useful for Magic, and kind of to simplify it. And even at that time, they did not opt to get rid of Elder Dragon from the 5 that we had seen in Legends. So today's episode really is going to start with kind of, well, what does it mean to be an elder in the multiverse?
Yeah, and so where we get into, I guess, the lore bit of this is just that there are a lot of different, like you said, Hobbes, there are a lot of different dragons that we first see with the title of Elder, and it does continue into Tarkir, where we have the Dragon Lords, and those specifically are on the Dragon Lord cards, excuse me, the Dragon Lord cards from the later years in Dragons of Tarkir, not during Fate Reforged, which is set about 1,280 years ago. Thank you again, Jay and Ellie, for that timeline knowledge. By the way, Jay and Ellie is on the Vorthos cast, and they are also awesome people. Go check them out. Where you get a lot of the nitty gritty date stuff like that, the details. But so yeah, in Fate Reforged, which is way in the past, because wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff from the Tarkir block, all of these dragons are just legendary creature dragon. But when you get to Dragons of Tarkir and you see them progressed about 1,300 years, then they have gained the Elder Dragon title, and they are the Dragon Lords of their own clans, and they are separated, I guess, more so from the rank and file dragons, the younger dragons in those clans.
Quick note too about the elder dragons from Tarkir. One thing that is interesting about how they interact with the world and their kind, like the way Tarkir works, the dragons kind of come from the dragon storms. They're not hatched and born, but they are in sort of the mold of the 5 elder dragons. So even though they are not actually progenitors of their own race, they are the leaders of a type of dragons. They are the paragon of that type of dragon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they are almost emblems of the concepts that each of those clans embodies. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so then you get to Ixalan, where we have the Elder Dinosaurs, and these are, again, distinguished from the rank and file dinosaurs, your crested snubhorns and such, by being these not only legendary creatures but elders, and they also tend to represent more conceptual things. You have I'm not gonna run down all of them because they're actually really hard names to pronounce, but for instance, the big dinosaur that we have here as Zakama, subtitle Primal Calamity, and Zakama is sort of the Godzilla meets Ghidorah, three-headed dinosaur that represents the triune aspects of the sun, which the Sun Empire worships, the red-green, the Naya-aligned faction of this set.
And it flat out, that art straight up looks like Cerebus, the 3-headed dog.
Oh my gosh.
And just makes me so happy. I want to pet him.
Absolutely.
Zakama, you're a good boy.
Yeah, no kidding. And I mean, it is just, you do have these aspects that are represented: dawn, death, hunger, tide, storm, calamity. They're all of these natural world or ethereal concepts that these creatures embody. And I believe this quote here from the Art of Magic the Gathering Ixalan really, sort of knocks that in. They embody all of nature, from the rising of the sun to the rotting of the swamp, and that's Huatli, the planeswalker from Ixalan. So, these elders, I wondered, especially once we got to Ixalan, if these were representing less of sort of flesh and bone real creatures and more the, whether metaphorical or mythological creatures of this world that sort of more were aspects. They were something that we learned from in story, but they never actually showed up physically in the Ixalan storyline.
Which is kind of fascinating. Almost like the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Like, they're always kind of there in writing in. And actually, I think that is going to become relevant for our discussion on what it means to be elder and how that is different.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, aspects, but they're metaphorical concepts, less so than maybe real people. I don't know. And I guess the last part of this that Jay writes about is a notable non-elder, and that would be Niv Mizzet. So Niv Mizzet is the Perun, or founder of the Izzet Guild on Ravnica, where our story is currently at right now. Niv Mizzet is currently the guild master as well, but he is a dragon, and he is about 15,000 years old as of the events of Guild Pact.
Yeah, but I mean, he is a leader of a clan.
Right.
He has been for a long time. He basically won the equivalent of a dragon's war and is not an elder.
Right, and that's the interesting thing. And the reason, as Jay talked to, as I'm understanding this, or maybe it wasn't Jay, but somebody else asked Doug Beyer in Magic, in Wizards of the Coast, about Niv Mizzet and why he wasn't an elder. Sort of the understanding is that he's not a progenitor of his own group of dragons, so much like the Tarkiri dragons, he doesn't have a line of dragons coming from him. That there aren't other dragons that he rules over. He is a ruler of sorts, but he isn't a dragon lord in that same way. But that being said, Doug does sort of concede that a lot of those boxes that these other dragons check, Niv Mizzet also checks.
Yeah, and I think he hits some of them, but one of the important ones, it seems, is that he doesn't have that connection to his kind, specifically to dragons, as an elder dragon, as a guild leader, as a Perun. He has all these titles because he's the master of this guild, but it's a different sort of entity.
Now, I want to highlight that Jay's article was written before our return to Dominaria, when we actually saw our original 5 legends and our 5 elder dragons return, because I am not fully convinced that they embody all of this idea of the initial, what I think is it the initial that came from the the Doug Beyer one about the Tarkir ones. I'm not sure if that applies to our original 5. And actually, technically our original 6, because Ugin, while not represented as an elder dragon on a card, is an elder dragon. In that he was from the same brood as kind of Bolus and...
Sort of. I think it's a weird thing, because this is one place where I think we have to peek behind the curtain a little bit, looking at not just like the story and how the story is presented, but also how stories are created on a meta level. To be perfectly honest and maybe slightly callous, I think one of the reasons that Niv Mizzet is not an Elder Dragon is that they weren't using Elder Dragon when the first Ravnica set was printed. And now, 3 Ravnica sets later, they decided they didn't want to add it, as it would have been relevant in the first set, but wasn't used. So they're going to continue Niv Mizzet forward as not an Elder Dragon.
I really like that idea, kind of that marriage between what actually is happening and what is needed because of how the story's been developed. Because go ahead, Alex.
It's a thing that happens a lot in properties that sort of start and kind of explode and then have a story but don't really have a story, and then later they realize a story would be helpful, which is kind of where Magic is at. If you try to dig too far beneath the surface for storylines from the first 2 or so years of the game, there isn't much, and it doesn't really coherently fit with what they've done later. They've kind of retconned things and sort of hand-waved things and made things somewhat fit, but they don't fully fit.
I mean, it's part of the mending is to just explain things away.
Well,
right.
Yeah,
hand-wavy.
That happened too. But and which is fine, and that's just the nature of these things. And so we kind of fit the stuff in how we can fit it in, and it's great for people like us because it lets us do podcasts where we talk about it. And in addition to our contemporaries who are also writing articles and doing podcasts about some of this stuff. And that's just how these things work sometimes. And that's where we kind of get an interesting question and an interesting conversation, at least we think, with this question of elder. What does it mean to be an elder? Because I think you're right, and I hadn't really thought of that, Hobbes, that the first 5 don't really fit the criteria. By the criteria that rule Niv Mizzet out, at least some of those 5 probably should have been ruled out too.
Yeah, and I don't... not to contradict what you're saying, Alex, but it is worth noting, too, that the actual events of the, to use a large word here, the Dracogenesis on Dominaria, which, if that's not a magic card, that should be. But with the, I can't remember the name of the Ur Dragon, with the Ur Dragon coming and, dropping all of the Elder Dragons from the original, the Legends Elder Dragons. That full story actually only came out, last year, right? That was right around when we started the show.
Yeah.
And so that is, like, you're completely right, though. Like, even in that, they are backsplaining a lot of stuff that they never had backstory for, and so a lot of this is tangled and messy and not particularly intended to be fully continuous. I invented 2 words in this little blurb here. I'm really proud of myself.
And this brings a question. I don't know if one of you were going to more skillfully segue into it or not, but I'm going to just blunder into it.
Perfect.
Another aspect of us having not been back to Dominaria when this article was written, as you were saying, Hobbes, is that Jay also didn't have our first Elder Demon to look at as part of this question. Because Belzenlok is an Elder Demon. But reading through the story, and I didn't read it with this lens, so I may very well have missed it, but I didn't see a lot of connection between him and other demons.
No.
So, that's exactly, Alex, where I was thinking of going to, because that's the whole thing that I'm like. I remember when we asked Jay, I had asked him when we were first conceiving this episode about his article, and he had talked about, this is where it's at. It hasn't been updated for Belzenlok, and we get Belzenlok, and I am now stuck with what is a Elder Demon on Dominaria.
Well, and it's
other than the last of the quote-unquote, like, Liliana Pact.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he is not none of the other demons that hold Liliana's demonic pact are Elder Demons also. And that is a confusing thing. So
this just occurred to me. This is like going really deep on hand wavy. I believe fridge logic is the trope on TV tropes for this. But think about this now. Belzenlok was busy claiming like every other title that he could come up with of dark things that happened on Dominaria. What if he called himself an Elder Demon?
Right. I mean, there was this discussion,
Wizards
right?
had no choice but to print it on a card, otherwise he wouldn't appear.
Right. Like, I mean, there was this whole thing, like, where he just, like, basically took whatever title and was like, yeah, that's mine. Yeah, that's me. Yeah, Elder. Yeah, the dragons are Elder. Why wouldn't a demon be?
Yeah, and then it's still EDH, right?
Right.
Yep.
Literally.
Elder Demon Highlander. Yep.
And Elder Dinosaur Highlander. I mean, there may be a problem in our initial answers. None of us came up with D words for our tribes.
See, the problem with that is I can't do Elder Doggo Highlander because they'd be hounds, and EHH is just ridiculous, guys.
I could not handle that. Well, it calls into just understanding, Elder is more than old. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
Elder is a title, so it could be, like Alex said, Belzenlok drew this title to himself because he just took titles. That's what he did. I mean, what Wizards has officially said is that Elder has some sort of connection to others of their type. They're old and supremely powerful. It is more a title that is bestowed, and they tend to have a connection to lesser members of their kind and embody the primal, like you were saying with the dinosaurs, the primal essence of what it means. And from what we've seen so far, we've only seen this with one demon, some dragons, and dinosaurs. And I'm just curious what it means for Magic to have this as an idea that is separate from old or powerful.
Well, and I think it's an interesting question for what does it mean for us, for real life. I mean, an elder is just one of the honorifics too that we see in society. It's just one of the titles that people get and give. And you have, when we're talking about a church setting, maybe you have father to refer to the priest, or pastor to refer to your pastor. You think about government, you have Mr. President. But yeah, there's a number of different titles that we all get and give. I mean, think of even Mr. or Mrs. You say that to somebody, it's more of a used in a formal context, but you say that to somebody to show respect to them. You don't just walk up to some stranger and say, if you know their name, you don't just say, "Oh, hi there, Bill." You'd say, "Hi there, Mr. So-and-so." Or what, you're showing some deference, you're showing some respect, and there's a certain weight and formality given to that.
There's also an interesting thing that I hadn't thought about in the context of the elder and things and titles like that is quite often titles are contextual. Depending on what context you're in, there's going to be different circumstances where you use somebody's title versus when you don't use somebody's title. There's different titles for different times and in different places for the same people.
I mean, for instance, I don't expect you guys to call me Dr. Hobbes Q.
Right.
I don't kind of require or expect that. I mean, it would be nice every once in a while. However, if I am in a work setting, depending on the environment that I'm in, that is a title that conveys something about me. So this came up today even, that I was talking about the fact that I was meeting with somebody for the first time for, say, therapy. Having that title of doctor kind of suggests that I have been through some sort of a vetting process, that I'm licensed. I actually had a veteran today question why my business card says licensed on it. And, it's that idea that by being a doctor with a license, I have been vetted. I have earned something.
And in some ways, talking about.
Right. And that brings along, for some people, I may be able to build trust with somebody because of that title alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it is, credentials and, credentials alone often give, sort of demand an amount of social respect or social weight. But I think what they represent, like you're saying, is that experience. It's the wisdom that you get along with that, the learning that you've gone through and had to accumulate in order to get to the position that you're in order to get that title. It's the even though you might not like who he is or what he does, Dr. Phil McGraw is a doctor. Dr. Phil is a person, isn't he? He's right. But he's not like an MD.
So he is this is a complete tangent.
That's fine. We can cut this out anyways.
He is a psychologist. He technically is a clinical psychologist who has not had an active license to practice clinical psychology in 20 or 30 years.
Was he once?
He once was. He
okay.
did, he earned his degree. He did get the license.
Was he de-licensed?
He is not licensed.
Was he stripped of his license though?
No.
Oh, okay. He just let it expire. Okay.
he let it expire. There actually was some kind of sketchiness around it, but he
Not a good example.
So,
then I'll remove
this
it.
actually, this is a really good example because it's me getting on my soapbox. But
Dope.
he has the right to call himself doctor.
Sure.
He has earned a PhD within the field of psychology. Me being able to call myself a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
If I am talking from a clinical perspective or giving any type of advice under a clinical perspective, I cannot call myself a psychologist unless I am licensed.
That makes sense. Well, and it's kind of the difference between like, you'd still call a former president Mr. President, but that dude doesn't have the keys to Air Force One.
As much as we would like him to.
Right. but it does still,
Yes.
there is a certain amount of, and again, like, even though that achievement was in the past, there is a certain amount of respect that can be afforded to that person for what they once achieved. We're not going to still allow that person, if they've not kept up on their career or their credentials or whatever, we're not going to let that person practice, obviously, because there's a certain amount of vetting and maintenance and continued practice of the principles that they agreed to, that's necessary for them to be working with people. But they know some things, right? They know a heck of a lot more than I do about that field.
Right. And I think that that's, how we use titles in our society is exactly what you're saying. We use titles as a way to convey information about that person. And it may be that that is what Magic is trying to do, that Elder is different than regular Dragon, and it's an important distinction, even if the cards on a power level are the same. From a lore perspective, what we care about, there is a difference. And even when we're talking about one of the oldest dragons in the multiverse, outside of the elders that we know about in Niv Mizzet, does not get this as an honorific.
Yeah, it is interesting too. I don't know that. People refer to Niv Mizzet as Guildmaster, so that's an honorific that he gets. It is interesting though that like on Tarkir, sort of the in-world flavor analogy to the elder creature type is Dragonlord, and you do see in the most recent Tarkir story during the M19 cycle of stories, where we find out more about the Elder Dragon War and all that stuff. During the present day conversations, you do see, I believe it's Atarka is spoken to. Right, Atarka shows up and intercepts Yasova and her granddaughters, and Yasova addresses Atarka as Dragonlord. And so again, there's a deference, there's a respect, there's a, all of that sort of thing, that honorific shown. There, though, I don't think at Hobbes's psychology office that you are going to theoretically get your head bitten off. Literally. I mean, like, possibly if the secretary's having a bad day. Metaphorically then, but not literally.
Yeah, and I will say that it's an interesting line to walk. I am guessing that Nicol Bolas is an Elder Dragon in every situation. I am not a doctor in every situation.
Yeah.
And I think some of that comes down to the person and the title, perhaps, too. I could see Nicol Bolas being the kind of person who would want everyone in his life to call him doctor if he had a doctorate.
Right. But there was, for instance, to that point, there was a teacher in my high school who he was the head of the department. I mean, he had a lot of titles, actually. He had a master's degree. He was the head of our theater department. He, was quite a bit older than me. But he insisted not that we refer to him as Mr. Janes, but as Ralph. And so that does give a different effect. And I wonder what your two's thoughts are on that. That's a great point, Alex. So why would that happen?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that. I will say that there's an interesting divide at times between medicine and psychology in this. Psychologists are a lot more likely to go by their first name even with clients. So doctor is almost reserved for specific situations. I will give an example. I worked on an acute psychiatric unit where we saw people short term. It was usually for stabilization. There was quick turnaround. And I preferred to and appreciated when I was identified as doctor on that unit because it gave me that level of what I was saying before, whether it's deserved or not, it gave me a level of respect and a level of clout. Now, if I am working with somebody long term in a therapy setting, I choose to go by my first name because I am developing a very different relationship with that person, and I am trying to somewhat not have it be a Western ideal of I am the doctor, I am going to tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm. You're trying to build more of a, not necessarily a peer-to-peer relationship, but more of a close relationship, like a more personal relationship with that client.
Yep. And I will say this is generational. I have veterans who are very uncomfortable not addressing me as doctor. And it does tend to come from an older generation. You are a doctor. You earned your degree. You are a doctor. And that they are uncomfortable calling you anything but.
I think it's interesting, too. You talk about the generational difference, and we have seen, even in regular daily speech, that formality has become much less of a common thing, at least in America. I don't know if that's different in other cultures and other countries and other languages, too. I know that German, it's considered extremely rude if you refer to a stranger not as Herr such and such or Frau such and such, because you don't know that person. How dare you? And that's reasonable. That's their culture. That's their language. It's the equivalent of Mr. or Mrs. But it is interesting that I'll even see this with younger families that are starting. So one of my wife's cousins has a 4-year-old kid, and she refers to her aunt as Katie. Not as Aunt Katie, but Katie. But if I referred to my aunts or uncles just as their name, they would consider that a kind of a bit rude. If I just said so-and-so instead of Uncle so-and-so, that would be kind of an off-put for them. And I think that's interesting to note, is it is a generational thing, and we are starting to evaporate some of that formality as we go forward throughout our society's progression.
I'm still thinking about my 6th grade teacher, who I still don't know her last name because she just went by Sandy. And yeah, no, she was, and she was an excellent teacher and was very good at it. She was actually won some Minnesota State awards for some of the stuff she did. But I'm just trying to, put that in context with other teachers, and I don't know that was a specific. It was definitely about the relationship she was trying to build. I don't know that it ultimately was wildly different from all of my teachers, but it was certainly different from most of them. I'm not sure that I actually have anything more to add there. I think you two covered that really well.
No, that's fair. I just think it is interesting. Yeah, it is. I don't know that we have really actionable advice on this one. It's just something that it's curious to note. It's interesting to watch, and it's interesting to see sometimes, though, how those honorifics or that idea of respect based on what position you hold can sometimes be it can either be used, it can either be set aside and used only as here's the wisdom that I bring to this situation, or it can be used as weight thrown around to gain undue respect, that sort of thing. If you see a supervisor in your workplace, sometimes they will, pull rank a little bit on you. Pulling rank is actually a perfect term for this. But it is the like using their position to, ask something unnecessary of you when really they just do the schedule. They just organize the schedule, and that's really their only responsibility. Sometimes they'll order the supplies. I may or may not have had a supervisor who did this all the time when I used to work in retail.
You seem to be describing an awfully specific theoretical situation, Joe.
Theoretically.
Joe, you were saying that you don't think we necessarily have actionable advice on this one, but I think we kind of do. Less specific advice, but it's more of a thing of mindfulness. It's a thing that I know you talk about a lot, Hobbes, and it's a good term, and it's a philosophy that I've kind of been pushing towards, but I'm glad I have a term for it because it makes it easier to quantify and to discuss. But a mindfulness then of how titles are used around you, how you and other people in your life use titles, and what the contexts are, and for the good, for the bad, for the something in the middle. Just something to be aware of.
That's a great
The
point.
awareness piece is just huge. It's realizing the power that names and honorifics have. And I will flat out say I have just been sitting here and have come up with the fact of why Gristlebrand is not an elder. So, Gristlebrand is not an elder because he realizes the power behind that honorific, and he is trying to hide from Liliana.
Oh,
Inside the Hell Vault.
Yes. Well, yeah.
Or maybe he is just very sensitive to the plight of EDH players, and he doesn't want to be an elder demon if he can't be played in the format.
He knew he was going to get just like snap banned.
Magnanimously given up the title, so that.
And I think while we're speaking of sensitive elders, we have to go back to the OG sensitive elder and curl up with a good book.
Yes.
Wow, thank you. Finally, I feel like this cast is beginning to understand me.
Because you're old?
Yeah. And a doctor.
Now get off his lawn and read a book.
And fade.
That's our show. You can find the podcast at Goblin Lore Pod on Twitter, or email any questions, comments, or concerns to goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support your friendly neighborhood gobslugs, you can do so at patreon.com/goblinlorepod. Goblin Lore is hosted by Hobbes Q, who you can find on Twitter at HobbesQ. This episode was written and co-hosted by Alex Newman, who you can find on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. Engineering, editing, and production for this episode is by Joe Redeman, who you can find on Twitter at Findhorn. Our music is by Vintergotten, who you can find on Twitter at vintergotten.com. Logo by Stephen Raphael on Twitter at Stephen Raffle. Goblin Lore is a member of the Geek Therapy Network, which you can check out at geektherapy.com or at Geek Therapy on Twitter. And remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.